All right, listen, if you like roster moves, hearing about the players and the teams, then oh boy, do I got an episode for you. Let's get into it. Hey folks, my name is Apostle. Welcome back to Watching Overwatch, also known as WoW. As we all know, Overwatch Esports can be a bit hard to keep track of, so this is the show where I can give you the rundown on everything you need to know in the scene. Now this week, we actually don't really have any games to cover, as it was the Swiss stage for OWCS, which was the only thing running, and the Swiss stage didn't have any official streams. However, there were a lot of player streams, so what I would recommend is check out your favorite player's Twitch or their socials and see if they've uploaded the VODs from their games. Personally, I would recommend checking out LH Cloudy's stream. He was streaming most of his matches, and those are some peak games. Anyway, after I talked about Roster Mania last week a little bit, it actually exploded right after I uploaded the last video, so we have a ton more news to get through now. But we're gonna kind of cover it as we go through the results from the Swiss stage and see who made it into the groups for OWCS, EMEA, and NA. There's been a whole lot of updates, so it feels like it's easiest to just combine it into one. Before we jump over there though, we do have a couple roster moves from Asia that we gotta get through. First off, Crazy Raccoon have signed Knife. Knife is a very talented rookie, if you can even call him that at this stage. I think he's got a good amount of experience under his belt. Even if he's not a rookie though, he's definitely considered some top young talent. It's crazy to think that we're in a world where Lip might end up getting benched for a bit, but that's where we are now. That being said, Knife is a great signing, and it's really cool to think about how he went from playing on Paris Eternal in Overwatch League, the worst team in the league, to now being on Crazy Raccoon, arguably the best team in the world. Huge shout out to this guy, really hoping he pops off here. With a good team at his back, we could see some insane potential coming in from him. Now secondly, once again have announced the signing of a main support to replace Lingsa, who was released following that scandal. They've announced Mew will be joining the team. And you might be wondering, who the heck is Mew? Never heard of this guy. Well, the hint is in the name, as he was actually formerly known as Xerneas and Yveltal, who played for Chengdu and Guangzhou. He's been in the scene a long time, and he just always changes his name to a different Pokemon. Don't know what's up with that. Guess he's just a fan, but he is now playing for once again, so that's a pretty good pickup. Now with that signing, once again, have a complete roster again. So we don't know where they're going to be competing yet, but they have the capability to, so we'll keep an eye open and see what their next move will be. All right, now let's buckle down and get into it. We're going to be starting things off with OWCS NA. Now in both regions, the group stages have 16 slots, and in NA, Toronto Defiant, NRG, and Nightmare all auto-qualified, along with Timeless. However, if you watched last episode, you'll remember that Timeless disbanded. So their players all got released, and the players were actually acquired by two teams, the main one being Citrus Nation, who also happened to get the 4th spot that they had. So Citrus now have Kuffa, Doomed, and Luke Mino on their roster, looking really strong. But we didn't get to see them play because they've now auto-qualified, so we'll have to see how this changeup will work out for them. And the remaining 12 spots were settled in Swiss. TSM finished first, featuring a new roster that had Liar, formerly of M80, as well as Squid, Riker, and Vision, who also came over from Timeless. Riker was actually on Timeless originally, then went to TSM, then went back to Timeless, and now is back on TSM again. So he's been all over the place, but the fact that they finished first means this roster is clearly strong, and honestly, I really like these pieces. We'll definitely want to be keeping an eye on TSM to make big moves here in the group stage. And the cutest team in the scene, Fluffy Dreamland, is back. They've actually signed Renko over from TSM since he got replaced by Squid. They also picked up Ryan from Shigami and Wisps, who's been on all kinds of teams, but most recently has been popping off and calling all heroes. These roster changes seem to have worked out pretty well for them, and they had a great performance there in Swiss, easily securing their spot. But now here's a real interesting change. Shikigami have signed some huge names onto their team. For those who don't know, Shikigami has been consistently poking at the top. They made groups in stage 1, and then they made top 16 in the next 2 stages, but this one might be theirs to take. They've actually added Fleta and Sunjun to their team. Now Fleta, anyone who's watched Owl will already know who he is. Former Overwatch League MVP, an insanely flexible player who is known for his Echo, his Tracer. He's a huge part of why Shanghai were basically able to reverse their legacy. However, Fleta is just coaching this team though, so we're not seeing him on the field, but it's still exciting to see what he might bring to this team. Now Sunjun, you might not recognize this name yet, but if you don't yet, then you will soon. He was actually briefly on Seoul Dynasty for a little bit, getting signed when Prophet was out. After that, he's been on a bunch of teams throughout NA contenders and in OWCS, including TSM earlier in the year. After that, he went to Hajakdan, where he looked really good and was keeping it close with some of the best out there. But he's now come back to NA playing for Shikigami. So with Fleta and Sunjun, definitely got to keep an eye on this team, right? I mean, these are such wildcard signings that it could really propel them high if they play it right. Now, next up, we have a couple interesting teams that placed way higher than I think anyone would have expected. Shout Tua and Ramatra Punch. Chautua is a Junker Queen team with Romani, K41, and is actually being coached by Jake. Romani, for those who don't know, is a famous Junker Queen player who isn't quite a one-trick, but he's basically a one-trick. In recent memory, I can only ever remember him seeing play Junker Queen, and he's definitely good at it, to be fair. On the other hand, Ramatra Punch is a Reinhardt team featuring Derpy, a famous Reinhardt one-trick from the ladder, but they've also signed Senna, as well as Angelic, who are a couple other very talented players that we normally see on more serious teams, but make a surprise appearance here. Both these guys placed surprisingly high given that they're kind of meme teams, but maybe that's just the meta diff right now. They are both playing Rush variations, right? So Rush clearly strong, it's working out for them. Now Rad Avidity, they have made it in as well. You'll remember I talked about this roster next week, and it looks like Wub's curse of never making it out of the Swiss has finally been beaten by Bun's ability to make it into every single OWCS group stage that she plays in. They didn't place quite as high as I think they would have liked, but I'm sure they're still getting used to playing together, so keep an eye on these guys, see how they do. Team Z is back as well. They made top 16 last stage, and these feature a bunch of good up-and-comers, as well as X10 and Peace, who we saw in the Calling All Heroes finals, and Painkiller on tank, who looks strong, as well as Hanwei, who I think might be a good pick for an upcoming support. Now Rad actually had a second team playing under the name Blast Off Buds, and now I'm a little biased to like this team since it's featuring Carmez, who's actually an old teammate of mine, so shout out to him, as well as Emran and Redex, who you may know from St. Clair College, my alma mater. So personally, I really like these guys. I hope they can go far. Definitely a sleeper pick when you look at the teams here, but yeah, I think they have a lot of talent, so best of luck to them. Next up is Tanuki Tapire. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong, I have no clue how to say that word. This team is actually made up of the Arizona State University Corps. Arizona State University has participated in the last couple OWCS stages, and they performed well, but with school starting, they probably just want to compete under a different name, and they're still performing well here as they've again made it into top 16. Now this is actually the sister team to Tanuki Esports, who made top 16 last stage, but they didn't quite make it this stage and they fell in the Swiss bracket. Next, a couple unknown teams that have made it in, EXN Zenith and Absolution. These teams have several tier 3 regulars, and you know, they're looking for their chance to prove themselves. There are a lot of unknowns with these two teams, and you know, maybe they did just make it in because of the meta kind of throwing a wrench into everything. But I think it is worth keeping an eye on as, you know, every player's got to start somewhere, right? But the final spot, just barely squeaking in, goes to YFP, who relied on a tiebreaker to get that 12th spot. YFP actually acquired Vice, which was a team from groups in stages 2 and 3, and performed well, but weren't quite able to get top 8. But that's not really the important bit. Let me give you some YFP lore here, right? YFP was one of the first orgs to really participate in OWCS, and they tried to participate in stage 1 with a team that ended up being subject to roster mania. They got picked apart by M80 and a whole bunch of other teams, and what they were left with ended up becoming LFO. And LFO is a team that became FMCL. FMCL then went on to become Nightmare. So it's a whole butterfly effect going on there. After that fiasco in stage 1, YFP tried to make an EMEA team for stage 2, but they couldn't get a roster done by the signing deadline. By stage 3, they decided to focus on Calling All Heroes, where they announced YFP Pixies, which eventually ended up becoming YFP Super Shy. But now in stage 4, they've finally made it in after they've signed Vice, and they also added Aid and Ares, who you might know from Insomnia over in the Pacific region. They got in by the skin of their teeth, but I'm really hoping this team goes far. They've had such bad luck in the first few stages, I think they deserve a break. But in some names of note that aren't here, we have Who is Goldfish, which was a stage 1 team that looked like they had some pretty decent upset potential. They were led by Dust on the main tank, who looked like a really good tank rookie, but unfortunately couldn't quite close it out this time. And another well-known name that didn't make it in is actually Nightmare Rotation. You'll recognize that as the team of one-tricks that we briefly went over last week. Their one-tricking wasn't quite enough to get them a spot, so unfortunately we won't be seeing any crazy shenanigans this time around. Anyway, that wraps up North America, so now let's jump into EMEA. For the top spots, we had Space Station Gaming, ENCE, Virtus Pro, and Twisted Minds, so no shakeups there. Getting into the Swiss results, Piece of Cake were actually able to finish first. You'll remember I talked about this team last week as being the former Gaming Gladiators roster. It looks like they finally started playing well again, and hey, look at that. When they play good, man, they play good. And going off former Gaming Gladiator, Team Peps have joined them in the top 4 now that they have their full French roster. In second place though, we have my favorites of you, SR Check, the Finnish core led by Cloudy on the Reinhardt, along with Danet and Fi on the DPS. This team is so much fun to watch, and I gotta say, Ghost 91 on the Baptiste is actually cracked. This guy was dealing more damage than his DPS while still beating out the enemy team's healers. He's an unreal talent on BAP, and is no small part as to why they're seeing such success. Getting second place is no small feat here. Now, something else cool is that Quick Esports is back. Quick Esports, they managed to make top 6 in stage 1 with a really strong looking team, but after losing there, they kind of bowed out and they've been silent. But they are back now and they have a really cool roster. They've signed Hitori from Super Shy, as well as Lauren, who personally I think is the best Spanish DPS. I think he was robbed from Team Spain, but... And then on support, they have Strebor and Yoham. You'll recognize Yoham from also being on Gaming Gladiators. Now, this team did lose games to Exoblivione and a one-man army, but they were actually able to 2-0 piece of cake, so not a bad showing from them. My favorite part of this roster, though, has got to be the fact that Ken is here. Ken, formerly of Aw Yeah, is finally on a real team. For those who don't know, Ken was on Ayab, the team of One Tricks, and you know, he got up to silly stuff, but you could see the talent that this guy had. He has some real flawless looking mechanics at times. I'm really excited to see what this guy can do when he's on a serious team and really just giving it his all. I'll tell you right now, I bet you this guy's gonna go far. Also returning, we have Exoblivione and a one-man army, like I kind of hinted to before. Now, a one-man army, they haven't really made any changes, but Exoblivione, they actually signed the Hypnos roster that was released. With one change, Tekuno has come in instead of MCD. And for those who don't know, Hypnos is kind of a sister team to Exoblivione. So it makes sense that Exoblivione would want to bring those guys up after they saw more success than them in the last stage. Now, as you might have guessed from when I talked about Ken, Aw Yeah is actually not participating in this stage. No official reason has been given, but they've said that they're just going to be taking it easy and evaluating their options moving forward. They haven't disbanded yet, so hopefully they stick around, but it's up in the air at the moment. However, we do have someone to carry on their legacy, as Wasp Oh No made it in. They've actually signed Gurk over from Aw Yeah, everyone's favorite Junkrat One Trick, who, by the way, is currently rank 1 and 2 in EU on Junkrat only accounts, which is kind of crazy. But don't get too attached to this team quite yet, as I don't want to turn this into drama alert or anything, but they might be disqualified as there are rumors that KDM, the support player, has been cheating. Now, nothing has been determined for sure yet, but that is something worth knowing. Now, Hypnos, who we just mentioned, they are also back after signing a bunch of T3 talent. And honestly, I'm gonna be real, I don't know really any of these guys, but considering their placement, they must have found some hidden gems. So they must have done some good scouting and stuff, and you know, maybe these are guys worth keeping an eye on. Now, to round out our known teams, we have Metaboys and Vendetta. Both the teams have mostly the same roster from the first couple stages, but Metaboys have signed GCB, who you might know from Sheer Cold and other rosters, as well as a couple new tanks. Metaboys have made it to groups in the past 2 stages, but they're still trying to break into that top 8. Vendetta come in with entirely the same roster. Cookie and China on the DPS still looking good, China being a big up-and-comer, as well as ANJ and Kronos there on the support. The big question mark for this roster is still Hybrid on tank for me. Hybrid, of course, was a DPS player for London Spitfire, so he is a former OWL player, but is he good enough to really contend with the top EU tanks? I don't know, remains to be seen. Now, for our newcomers, we have Team Gambit. While this is their first appearance in OWCS, they actually finished 9th in the Faceit League, and they've now finished 8th here in the Swiss stage. So clearly this is a pretty solid team. It looks like they've been consistently performing and getting better. So, you know, while this one might not be their tournament, I think long term, maybe we see something big here. And finally, we have Ronaldo 7. Bet you they'd lose to a team called Messi. This team is a mix of tier 3 and tier 2 talent, and these are names that have been around for a decent bit, so you know, this might be a scrappy team worth watching. I could see them having some really good games against the lower teams, so you know, good for them. And for the teams that didn't make it here, Celtas have failed to qualify. They made groups in stage 1 and then didn't participate in the next 2. So when we saw them coming in here in stage 4, we thought it might be a big comeback, but this definitely isn't what they were looking for, so unfortunate for them. But the real bittersweet one is Victory Esports. Victory Esports is actually a team featuring Who Are You? And you might be thinking, wait, wasn't Who Are You on Full House? Well, yes, he was, and he left them to go to Victory Esports. He's the reason why they had to drop out of the Asia wildcard. So he left them to go to this team that has now failed to even qualify for OWCS Stage 4. Who Are You? Maybe you should just stick to riding the bench, my guy. Anyway, that finally wraps up the roster mania results. Now, outside of OWCS, Collegiate is starting to heat up. We have a few leagues like NACE and NECC finally starting their games, and I believe the signups for Blizzard's Collegiate Championship actually finished this week, so that'll be starting soon as well. And leading up to that, the Overwatch Collegiate Ranking Association has released their preseason power rankings. I don't think there's any huge surprises here. Illinois, Winthrop, Maryville, and that top 3, of course, with Northwood nipping on their heels. And we do see Arizona State making what I think is their highest placement ever. And this one makes sense to me, because Arizona State, they've been practicing a lot in OWCS over the break, over the summer. They've been grinding, and I'm sure they're ready to show their results here in the collegiate scene. Now, while there is a lot of overlap between the players and stuff, ultimately the teams themselves are fairly different. So there's a lot of room for movement here, but either way, it's exciting to keep an eye on. And if anyone is really interested in this, let me know in the comments down below, and I might make a video focusing just on Collegiate. Anyway, now let's finally look ahead at what's coming up next. First off, we have the Asia main event. Teams have spent this past week preparing and getting ready for this, and it'll be happening from September 27th to September 29th, with the grand finals happening on October 5th. As I mentioned before, a lot of really good teams here, especially among those top Korean teams. So you definitely won't want to miss this tournament if you get able to catch it. And then happening at basically the same time, we also have OWCS groups. Now that the groups have been set, these teams are going to battle it out to figure out who the top 8 is for the brackets. So get your preds in, find your favorite team, and see how they perform. And keep in mind, that group stage is happening for both NA and EU, so check the times depending on where you are. Links to everything I've talked about can be found down below, and if you go to the Wikipedia pages, you can actually see the times that the matches will be happening in your local time zone, which is really helpful for a lot of people. Now, the Asia main event and OWCS groups will be broadcasted on the main pages, but co-streaming will also be occurring for games that maybe don't make it to the main broadcast, so make sure you look through the pages, check it out, see what you can find. Anyway, that wraps up everything that happened this past week. A lot of roster moves, a lot of exciting teams to keep an eye on. I think groups should be really fun here, especially for NA. NA's kind of been trailing behind, but finally they're looking really, really close. And yeah, even though Toronto might still just stomp everyone, I think outside of that, we should be seeing some really good games. So do your best to catch them all, but even if you can't, don't worry, because that's what I'll be here for. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all next week. Take care.